And we are rolling. Okay, welcome everyone this morning. This is the kickoff session of the People Track. We are very excited to have Sarah Beth Burke with us. Before I turn this over to her, we have here, if you can see my screen, the introduction to West Slope Startup Week. It's all month long, Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have lots of incredible programming. I think it's almost 60 sessions. Keynotes, book clubs, all kinds of social events and happy hours coming throughout the month. Very excited about this format. Already, I've been in one call this morning. The serendipity of being virtual across the Western state has already lent itself to some great new ideas and collaborations. So I'm going to get us started here this morning. We've got about a dozen people joining in. This is a wonderful session. First, I want to thank US Bank for being our platinum lead sponsor for West Slope Startup Week. And with that, let's get into Sarah Beth Burke's presentation on being more than your title. Hopefully you all downloaded your worksheets. I know I did. I've been playing with these last night. And Sarah's assessment, online assessment. I'm excited about this talk because I have a lot of identities in my work. As a solo entrepreneur, as a community builder, and I'm new to the area, to the state, coming from Austin and Richmond. So I'm just so energized by all of this. I can't tell you how happy I'm going to be a part of this first big virtual event. So all that said, I'll shut it and move it over to Sarah Beth to get you into the real meat of today's session. So Sarah Beth, will you take it from here?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Oh my gosh, first day of West Slope Startup Week, and I couldn't be more excited to be the opening session, pretty much. I see many of you are putting notes and introductions in the chat, so I really encourage. I've attended so many startup weeks in Denver and Boulder, I think Colorado Springs, and I think community is what this week is about, and I know we're virtual, so let's do our best by saying who you are, what part of the state you're in, any like LinkedIn or just information you want to share in the chat, I think is really valuable. I'm going to jump in and share my screen. And where did it just go? Oh, I know what I did. I think today is really going to be insightful and interesting, and I'm excited to tell you more about it. So hopefully, can everybody see? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. So this talk is called, Are You a Hybrid Professional? If you do more than one thing for work, then you likely are. And I think many, many entrepreneurs can relate to this because this is based on research. I'm going to give you some background in a moment, but I've interviewed and talked with many professionals in different industries. And I know entrepreneurs and small business owners wear so many hats. And what the heck do you call yourself? Who are you? So let me give a little more about where we're going. So the quick intros I just mentioned to do in the chat, I'm going to go through who I am and my backstory, how I got to this idea of hybridity. Then I'll give you an overview of who hybrid professionals are and some of the context. But this session is meant to be really interactive. So I want you to try on 2 different quick activities. I did send some information and handouts ahead of time. If you didn't receive those, if you didn't click on them, no worries. I actually have a surprise little interactive app that we're going to use on your phone that has some of that information so we can do this together. And I definitely want to spend some time at the end with Q&A. Here's what we're going to cover. What a hybrid professional is, why hybrid identity is a game changer, how hybridity can be your differentiating factor. I believe this is your truest professional self. You'll move away from using generic titles like I'm a coach, I'm a leader, I'm a developer. You're going to find a whole new way to talk about yourself that helps people see what your value is. And lastly, we're going to go through these 2 tools today. Your role as a participant, because I love the energy of having you in this session. Please jump in with questions anytime. Because I'm presenting, I'm not looking at the chat as much. So you can interrupt me, put something in a chat, and I'm gonna have my friend here tell me what you were questioning. Do that anytime during the presentation. I'm happy to go through. Also, have your smartphone near you. We're going to use a QR code to get some interactive content. I think you'll really like it. And be ready to be really self-reflective today. I'm going to ask you some questions about yourself you probably haven't thought of or even been asked before. And I think that's the true unique thing in this is hybridity is a whole new way to think about yourself. So let's get started with a short poll. If you use this QR code right now, you're going to get onto this app on your phone, and I'm going to put up the poll. So you should see 3 questions or 3 answers, and the question is, where are you in the development of your hybrid identity? So just tap one of the buttons. Are you unsure right now? Are you an emerging hybrid, meaning you think you're a hybrid, but you're really kind of sorting through what your hybrid identity is? Or are you an established hybrid? You're like, I've got this. I know what my hybridity is. I've been this, and I can talk about it really clearly right now. So just give me a sense. Awesome. I'm seeing some results. Looks like people are kind of split between emerging and established. It's neck and neck. Thanks. That was really helpful. We're going to come back to some other information with the QR code later. Also, the reason the QR code is valuable is we're going to be going through this word list and a Venn diagram. So I'll talk more about that. So who am I? I call myself a creative disruptor. That's my hybrid identity. And that's a title I created for myself because I didn't know what all my different identities were when they were mixed together. The foundation of my hybridity is being an artist, a researcher, an educator, and a designer. That was typically how I used to think about myself, as these 4 different things, which makes me sound kind of confusing, and it is a lot of different identities. And yet I knew I didn't just want to be seen as one or the other, kind of turning them on and turning them off. I felt like I needed to show up with all of these identities represented because that was really who I was. But that was my pain point. I was frustrated. I couldn't figure this out. So this is where I started. This is my professional identity in a lot of different situations. I was in the classroom. I would do speaking. I was facilitating design challenges. I did graphic illustration. I made art. And people saw me as fitting into one of these boxes. And yet I knew I was bringing all of these identities to the table simultaneously. And that's when I started researching, what is my professional identity? How do I talk about this? And more importantly, how have other people figured it out? So I went to go interview, observe, and do some really deep research on how do other professionals present themselves and their work identity, which led me to eventually doing this TEDx talk. And the image behind me there is really unusual because what the heck is this thing? There's no name for this. It's a creature. We know its parts. It's half human, half fish. And typically when we see half human, half fish, it's a mermaid. Except this artist, Renee Magritte, reversed. The top half is the fish and the bottom half is a woman. And that doesn't make sense. We're like, what is this thing? And when I saw this image, the artist side of me matched my research information and was like, wait a minute, this is my insight from my research work. This is what I'm feeling in my professional identity. I'm a whole new professional and I'm a hybrid. I'm combining these 2 or more identities into something I don't even know what to call. So this was a major aha moment to help me kind of break through and understand it's possible to be a combination of things. So I have just released a book that I'm really excited about called More Than My Title, where I share this whole background on who hybrids are, how they act in the world, what the different frameworks and theories are that support it, because there is this developmental trajectory, which is why I asked you in the poll, are you emerging? Are you established? Where are you in the development? Because people don't just wake up one night and suddenly realize they're hybrid professionals. It sort of grows and accumulates over time. And because there's so much to think about in this work, I created a workbook too that has activities to give people tangible ways to put hybridity into action, to figure out, okay, I get this idea, but what does it mean for me? And we're going to do some of the activities in the workbook. But why does hybridity matter now more than ever? It's kind of crazy what's going on with COVID and the workforce and the whole world, because suddenly we're seeing hybrid event ideas. And we're seeing companies that have hybrid life insurance. Hybridity is infused because it's a value. Hybrids are combinations that offer more innovation, kind of a competitive advantage. And in fact, Burning Glass had a report in 2019 that said it projects hybrid jobs will grow by 21% over the next decade and get paid 20% to 40% more than other jobs. Now, this report is online, you can download it, and hybrid jobs are a little narrow. I talk about hybridity a little more broad than they do. They look at it as the combination of like hard and soft skills, tech sector with like business development and marketing, all of that kind of getting combined. But I think the point I want to make here is that this notion of hybrid work is on the rise. We've seen the gig economy grow. We know that people are trying to, develop products by acquiring and combining things. So where I'm taking this is if hybrid jobs are on the rise, that means hybrid professionals are too, because our identity as professionals in these jobs is changing. So if you haven't thought about what your hybridity is, this is the time to think about this. Here's how I frame it. There's an old way of thinking about work, which traditionally I think people say, hey, what's your passion? What's your purpose? What do you love to do? Why do you do it? Find that intersection, and that's what your career should be. That's the old way of thinking about career advice. This is my new way I want to propose to you. Work consists of three different parts, a three-legged stool approach. Your passion and your purpose are absolutely important, but identity is the missing leg. Identity is the thing you call yourself when you're doing your passion and purpose. And right now people use things like I'm a director of marketing, I'm head of sales, I'm a leader, I'm an entrepreneur. And that's a very general blanket way of talking about what your passion and purpose is. It doesn't really give us much information. So your hybridity and this hybrid identity is coming up with who are you? So here's my overview of hybrid professionals. There's three types of professionals we have in the workforce, and we usually talk about them this way. I say one type is singularity. Those are experts and specialists. They have one professional identity that really is their core driver. Then there's this notion of multiplicity. People that have many identities. They could be in the gig economy, or we call them multi-talented, polymaths, renaissance souls, slashes. There's a variety of names for multiplicity. But the missing type, there's a third bucket. We just didn't know what to call it. It's somewhere in between this landscape of singularity and multiplicity. It's hybridity. When these circles of multiple identities are connecting and literally overlapping, we are hybrids because we're integrating different professional identities and working from the intersection. That is the critical difference right there, is the intersection. When you're integrating instead of segregating identities, you are a hybrid. You may have also heard of T-shaped and pie-shaped or cone-shaped. There's so many different ways to think about people that are experts and generalists, but a hybrid even goes beyond that because it's the integration, the intersection is this spot we don't talk about in our identity. So if you do a lot of different things, like this little graphic is showing this guy doing, when you blend them together, that is your Care Bear stare, your magic, your superpower, your truest value in the workforce. The thing that people are hiring you for that you are amazing at is when you blend. So how do you talk about that? I think about this a lot like pizza as well, that you have these different ingredients, but you don't talk about or eat a pizza as one ingredient at a time. That defeats the point. I don't come in and say, I'm an artist, I'm an educator, I'm a researcher. I sound like a list of things. Instead, I want to talk about that totality, the sum of all my parts. I'm a creative disruptor. That's what I'm coming into your organization to do. That's what I want to share with the world. That's the impact statement I have. So what is the name of your unique kind of pizza? Because that's not a cheese pizza. There's some really special stuff going on. The relationship between your different parts is what you have to define. It's not just the things that you are. So obviously we have products like Sporks and Camelbacks that are hybrid products. We have companies like Airbnb and Uber and Tesla that are combining industries and markets and technology. So what does that mean for people as professionals? So who are hybrid professionals? Well, they can be celebrities and public figures like Michelle Obama and Bono and Lady Gaga. They defy a job title because they are philanthropists and actors and singers and advocates, and the list goes on. But we know them because their name is their brand. But then you have traditional workers that are out there, and these are some snapshots from LinkedIn. So you can see how people are listing identities and using pluses and commas, but then you have Brittany, who calls herself a chief fire starter at Fireside. That's different. That's a hybrid title. Jennifer Harris says people operations extraordinaire. Marsha is a Siegel household chief sanity officer. These are creative, original ways to call who they are. It's a new way to say, this is the name of who I am in my work. Here's some more examples of hybrid branding. The first words are sort of the professional identities that make up the name. So you can see sometimes it's two words being blended together, like hairstylist and therapist is a hairapist. In the world of entrepreneurship, we hear a lot of preneur stuff, right? The solopreneur, the artpreneur, the edupreneur. Those are combination kind of hybrid identities. But other ones are creative descriptors, even sort of analogies like a jolly good fellow or a superior knowledge translator. When I say those out loud, they sound different. They land different. They're intriguing. They cause me to become curious. And then I want to talk to you and explore more because I've never met someone who's a brand invigorator instead of just calling them a designer strategist catalyst. I think you get the drift. So as I mentioned, the book goes through a lot of this background, discovering hybrids and the path towards hybrid professional identity, but it's the workbook that really activates, well, how do I find my hybridity? So we're going to take a look at that. There's 5 steps in the workbook. I'm really just going to hit on kind of a little bit of steps 2 and 3. So this work starts with self-reflection. You need to know where you currently are. What do you currently call yourself? When I sit down and work with professionals who are interested in finding their hybridity, most of the time, they are really confused about where they are. Even though they have a job title, they tend to share with me 20 different things they do. So in that reflection spot, I help them get clear, what do you really do? The drilling down is getting clear about your primary professional identities. I'll talk about that more later. The intersections is where your juice is. It's where that part of you that is all of your identities coming together lights up and really shines. Then we hybridize in step 4. And the last part of this work is owning it. When you come up and find your hybrid identity, you have to feel confident that you want to share it, and it really showcases who you are. So the first activity is really looking at what are your professional identities. So take the QR code and we're going to jump in, and this is really cool. What you're going to get is a screenshot that shows the list of identities on your phone, and you can actually scroll with your finger. And I want to let's give you 3 minutes to scroll through this list and reflect on any identity that really resonates with you. So tap on them and they turn pink so that you're selecting the identities that feel like this one's me, oh, and I'm that too, and I'm also the connector, and I'm the go-getter, whatever it is. If you also have aspirations, identities, you're like, I don't do a lot in education, but it's something I want to be more of. I feel like being an educator is where I'm moving or trying to integrate. You can add a couple aspirational identities too. That's fine for now. So let's take a moment on this list and select all the words that are really jumping out to you. I'm going to drink some coffee. And if there are words that are missing that are not on this list, maybe just make a note on a piece of paper if you have something to write with, or just write that where you can remember. Obviously, it's a list that can always be added to. I don't want you to feel constricted. This is just to kind of preload and jumpstart you with a bunch of ideas. Okay, I'm gonna give you about 10 more seconds, then I'll tell you the next step. Okay, so hopefully you've selected a handful. I don't know how these marks are coming up. This is really interesting. There's some little drawing going on the screen. There's a presentation thing. Anyway, here's what I want you to think about. Some of your identities you're using all the time, and other identities you use once in a while. All of my research is based in identity theory, which means that identities can be fixed and fluid, they change over time, some you're born with, some you grow into. There's a lot of theory behind that. But essentially, when you show up in a certain context or situation, only a certain amount of identities are really there with you. And then if you go and hang out with your friends or you go back home, different identities are stronger and other identities become less present. So out of your list of however many you tapped on the screen, I want you to start narrowing them down and reducing. What we're trying to hone into are the identities that you use in your work every day. I call those your primary professional identities. They make you super excited. They really light you up. You get a lot of energy from those identities. We're trying to get this down to 2, 3, 4 at the top. So that really is the upper limit. 3 is the sweet spot. Now, the other identities you selected, I'm not saying that you don't have and you don't use, but they're not your primary. I call them non-primary. That means maybe you use them once a week or just during a certain project or just, they're not the ones that really, if you couldn't use anymore, you would feel like you were losing them forever. So that's the difference between primary and non-primary, the ones that are dominant and the ones that are great, but you don't have to use as often. Okay, so I'm giving you 5 more seconds to reduce your list. And by reducing, you just tap them again and they are deselected. And you really want 3 that are left highlighted in pink. That's your goal right now. I know it's hard to do and I'm moving through this fast. And I'm showing you this image too, just to give a little more time while you're deselecting. If you only have 2 primary identities, because you need at least 2 identities to be a hybrid, right? 2 identities creates 1 intersection. And if you have 3 primary identities, it creates 4 intersections. And 4 primary identities creates 9 intersections. So it starts to get exponentially more complex, which is why I'm giving you this range of 2, 3, or 4 primary identities. Because we're using this app today, 3 is the golden number to get us to the next step. Okay, if you're ready and you're down to 3, here we go. You're gonna see this, a Venn diagram of your different identities. And this is the magic. This is the question that we're really gonna dig into. Who are you when you're blending your different identities together? So this is an example of mine with the artist, educator, researcher. And activity 2 is about who are you in the intersections of your primary professional identities. That question tends to blow people's minds because it's a big question. They've never been asked before to think about themselves that way. So I changed the question to this. What are you doing in the intersections of your primary professional identities? That's a little easier, but still it's a pretty big question if you've never been exposed to this. So here's how I really have learned to frame it to make it the most accessible to move forward. What are you doing when you feel your best and brightest in your work? So we've pretty much eliminated the identity part to focus on actions that you're doing and saying to hone in and kind of reverse engineer your identities. So it looks like this. I'll give a story first, and then I'm going to break down my Venn diagram. I was working with Jenny to find her hybrid title. She started with me and her current title was head of marketing. When we found her primary identities, they were marketer, strategist, healer. She actually had this, not quite a side business yet, but she liked doing some like energy work with people, even though most of her day job was about communications and marketing. So I was like, that's interesting. By the time we worked through what she was really doing in those intersections, we came up with this, her hybrid title, Revealer of Possibilities. Now listen to how that sounds. Revealer of Possibilities is a very different way of calling herself and naming her work than head of marketing. That's the power of a hybrid title. And it's more accurate and more thought-provoking than what she was using before. It really stands out, and I think it really expresses who she truly is. So some clues that reveal your hybridity. I want you to reflect a little bit about these. Do you ever try new combinations of things? Are you ever inventing a new process or hacking systems, doing something with Salesforce or code or in the kitchen, whatever your work is? When you're doing things and coming up with new combinations, that probably means you're working in some intersections. Where do you possess rarity or onlyness in something? Now that can be defined a lot of ways. You could be rare in the fact that you're the only person on your team who's really good at client relationships. You might be the only person in your company. It might be in your state. Whatever band and constraint you want to see for yourself, but where you are the only one at something, that is probably an intersection. And the other one is, where do you see connections and patterns that others don't? Because you've got one foot in one identity and another foot in another, you start to see things in ways that other people have never seen before. That's an example of your hybridity. So again, coming back to the Venn diagram, I looked at my 3 identities, and then this is what I want you to think about. Boom. Let go of the current labels you've been calling yourself. Instead, we're thinking about, who are you? In my case, who am I as an artist educator, artist researcher, educator researcher, and in the bullseye in that center, the artist educator researcher. That's like my prime time intersection. Some examples of what I was doing and sensing about myself, I started making lists. I think it's really good to kind of put the identity words at the top as if you're adding them together, and then say, what am I doing? Well, I've been creatively analyzing data and using mixed media visuals with information and other data sources. I become really strong with empathy, and I'm studying patterns. So you can see I just started listing and exploring things I noticed I was doing in my work. A couple really clear examples. When I run meetings, I have people do role play during meetings. That's my designer researcher identities coming together. No one does role plays the way I do in that. I've also created really interesting infographics with a mountain range that gave an example of the different points in the ecosystem in Denver and Boulder. No one had put the data together in that way before. I didn't realize that was my hybridity. So after you start thinking about and making these lists of what you're doing, then you forget about the identity words and you start to look for themes across these different lists. I noticed I was using creativity and the words create a lot. Also, I was challenging things and disrupting and, changing the status quo. And I thought, is that a word of being a disruptor? And that's really how I started to distill and dig deep and see these new words for myself that I never called myself before, and came up with my hybrid title of creative disruptor. So your turn. I want you to take a moment to think about, what are you doing when you feel your best and brightest in your work? If you haven't tried brainstorming this yet, take a shot. Come up with 3 things you think are happening in your intersections. Just choose one intersection and give it a shot. I'll give you a moment to reflect on that right now. You could think of a current work project you have, a current work stream, one that's your favorite. Maybe it's a client you're really enjoying working with, or a new product you're developing. And what are you doing? What get very specific. If you just write, I really love working with my team, be more specific. What do you love doing? Are you enjoying spending time with them one-on-one on these Zoom meetings because you're learning about them in new ways? The more specific, that will help you see this part about yourself that's probably the hybridity coming through. If you're just writing general things, challenge yourself to get more detailed. And I will say, the intersections are the part of the work that takes people the most time to reflect on, and it will make your brain feel a little frustrated or maybe confused. So if you're feeling any of that right now, that's totally normal because this is really new. I usually recommend two things, which is one, give yourself time, take a break and come back to this later so that you have some fresh thinking. The other recommendation is to talk to some peers or friends or your partner. They become really good mirrors to help you think about what you're doing in your work that they might see that you don't see. And then your intersections can start kind of bubbling up more easily. So those are just a couple tricks.
Hey, Sarah Beth,
yeah.
I want to jump in because I think you had this really great slide, maybe 2 or 3 back, where you had your pairs of intersections. You had this one here, and this list. I think this would be great for people to screenshot. Because I found this one really helpful for myself of thinking like examples that you were using for your own intersections.
Thanks. Yeah, please take a screenshot. And a lot of this is in the workbook too. And yeah, this is a process. So I'm trying to break it down into parts, and we're doing the little sample this morning. Thanks for interrupting me. Okay, and again, once you make these lists, which I recommend you try and brainstorm about 5 examples per intersection. Each list represents one intersection. Then give yourself a break, come back to this with fresh eyes, and then you start to look for patterns and themes of what you've been writing in the different intersections, which helps you see fresh language, new keywords of what hybrid identity has been hidden amongst these intersections all the time. All right, I'm gonna move us forward. Hopefully you got a little bit of brain juice going. I know it's first thing in the morning. I'm throwing you with big questions, but that's why you came. The last part I want to cover today, because I get this question so much, is, okay, great. I figured out my hybridity, but what do I do with it? How do I introduce myself as a hybrid? Here's my strategy. First of all, always giving the caveat, you should know your audience, and your introductions definitely shift and change depending on the context. I think that's just a given. So customize this as you need when you need to. But essentially there's 3 parts I do, and this is called my hybrid professional identity elevator pitch. It's a handout I have in the workbook and on my website, but the 3 parts are this. The first part is your introduction. The second part is going through your list of professional identities that make up your hybridity. And the last part is the explanation of what those relationships mean. So let me walk you through it. I'll give a live example. Hi, my name is Sarah Beth, and I'm a hybrid professional. I call myself a creative disruptor. That means I combine my professional identities of being an artist, educator, researcher, and designer to transform systems and make an impact in complex situations, mostly focused on young children. So essentially, what I've learned and found works is right out of the gate, introducing myself as a hybrid is both, it does 2 things. The word hybrid is pretty familiar. People have heard that, but they've never heard of a hybrid professional. So you've both planted a really important keyword, and then you start to define it for them, because they're going to ask you immediately, what is a hybrid professional, or what is your hybridity? So the second part is explaining my hybridity has these 4 parts that it is created from. But that doesn't mean anything until you explain why. What do you do with those identities? So you put it back together in a sentence or 2 that gives the explanation. That framework takes about, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds, and it's a really clean and sharp introduction. I've used this in cover letters, I've used it in email intros, I've used it in person networking. Once you practice it, it does start to flow. But my other caveat here is when you're working with transitioning or feeling more comfortable about being a hybrid professional, practice this first with friends and family. Do this with people where you can stumble, you can kind of wordsmith it, before you start doing this in really professional situations or for interviews, because you just want to feel confident and you want it to feel natural. And I have seen this work really well for people that are negotiating even new job positions. A friend of mine said he used hybridity as his advantage to leverage a job offer because they said, we don't really get how to position you in our company. You do this, you do this, you do this. He goes, yeah, I'm a hybrid. That's why you want me. And they go, oh, so this is helpful. The word hybrid is an important keyword in addition to the rest. So before we go, I'd love to check in and see how this was, if this was helpful for you. And there's just 3 quick questions. Did you get a lot of interesting thoughts from this? That was high. Was it just interesting? Good to know. That's medium. And low was, cool, but maybe not for you. I'd love to just check in and get your thoughts on that. And then I also want to share, I'm going to leave this screen up for one more second. What's next, right? How else can you engage with this? If this just kind of whetted your appetite, I'd love to connect with you further. There is an online course that I've created that has all different parts. If you want to just jump into the professional identity words, or you want to work on the hybrid title, or you want to do all of it. And I really love talking with you and meeting professionals to work through your own hybridity. So anyone that emails me, the first 3 people, I'll give some free coaching to. So that brings us pretty much to the end, which is the book. If you're interested in getting the book, it's on Amazon, and the workbook is also on Amazon. And you can download a sample from my website. So I would love to jump in with some Q&A and talk more about what's on your mind.
Hey everybody, I'm Spencer, the People Track Captain. Thank you so much to Sarah Beth for this presentation. I know I've got a pile of notes in front of me. And while you think about your questions, I'll go ahead and touch on a few things that I found really valuable. There's this incredible sense of identity in our careers. There's a great author around the power of that identity. Now her name is escaping me. But it's why we have such a hard time when we do change careers. And what I love about Sarah Beth's work is that she helps you create a title that you can, that's transcendent. Like you can take it with you wherever you go, and you're not bound to the specific job or role that you had. So your identity just becomes much bigger around wherever you go. I love this about Herminia Ibarra. Great book to check out. It's called Working Identity. It talks about why it's such an incredibly powerful part of our career identity. So looking at questions from everyone in the chat, drop them in, or you can unmute yourself and ask them here.
Yeah, I'd love to encourage this to become more of a community part where if people want to come into video and be able to converse, it's really nice to have a discussion. Spencer, I didn't know about that book, so now I need to run out and check it.
It's very academic.
Very academic. And that has been one of the key takeaways I've heard from people I've worked with, is that your hybrid identity is what you own no matter what title or job or company you're working in. Because this notion, when people leave jobs, they're in job transition, they get laid off, whatever the case, losing that sense of your work actually has so much effect on your self-esteem. And it's one of those top things like losing a loved one or a divorce that just is so crazy intense. And so this notion that your hybrid identity is yours and you can change it over time, of course, but no one else is going to remove it from you. I'm always a creative disruptor as long as I want to be, which is empowering, and it gives me permission. And those are 2 keywords I've heard so much from people that I didn't know I could be a hybrid. This just unlocked my potential in a way I've never thought about. And they just feel a whole new sense of sort of unifying who they are that they just never tapped into.
Sarah Beth, I'm going to leave your website URL in the chat for everybody here at the end. And then again, of course, we're open to questions. You can unmute yourself. Or if you want to ask them via text, I'm happy to translate for you.
Thanks. Yeah, the rest of the, so I mentioned the book and the workbook, and you can get these in print or digital. But the professional identity math is a whole section on once you figure out your intersections and you've come up with these words that are really rising of like, wow, I'm a disruptor. I've never thought of using that in my title before. I talk about, well, how do you play with words? How can you experiment? Because we often get a little too analytical or very formal, like, well, I'm just going to be the chief head operating director, blah, blah, blah. But professional identity math gives you some tools in here about what if you add words together or substitute, or I love using analogies. I have a whole list of those. Some of them are funny, like calling yourself the ringmaster or the hurricane or the social butterfly. There's just all these references of different ways to think about what you do, and maybe those inspire how you blend your intersection words with some new language. And one woman I spoke with, she is just this big connector, and she runs these actually work groups in Denver around entrepreneurship and women. And she came up with a title called Vision Nectar. She's like, that's who I am. I'm the Vision Nectar. And at first I was like, that's so awkward. And now it's become catchy. And I think of her when I think of that word. So there's a lot to this.
And I'm going to ask this to you and to everybody here so that you can jump in and share, ask your own questions. But through Sarah Beth's presentation, do you find yourself getting stuck at any particular point? What was maybe most challenging for you? And we can address that here. And this question to Sarah Beth, where do you find most people kind of tripping up?
So the question, just to restate, is how are people tripping up, or what?
Yeah, this is such an incredible mind shift here. It's so powerful that getting ourselves out of our traditional thinking can maybe sometimes trip us up in our thinking. What steps sometimes do you find people maybe feeling challenged?
Great question. I think I try and start the progression of this work. It's like a 5 or 6 part journey, and choosing their professional identities, going through that word list, I always find people are really excited by that, and that's really easy for them. And then the next step, going to the intersections, it's like if we were doing an emotional journey graph, they go up, 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 and then it like crashes down. And I just want to be careful. I think the word list is deceptive. And I talk with people about that, where it looks really easy to just select words on that list. But there's a whole body of work that leads up to that, where I have people first do so much more self-reflection on the actions in their jobs or in whatever work stream, so that they don't just jump to identities. They start by looking at what they do. So for instance, if I'm doing a lot of, giving a lot of feedback, and I ask a lot of questions, and I'm noticing these are things I'm listing, then I convert those into identity words like, oh, I notice I ask a lot of questions in my work. Maybe that means I'm an inquisitor, or I'm a thought provoker. And I would not have maybe selected or used those nouns, those identity words, if I hadn't done that prior reflection. So starting with looking at what you do, the actions, is a step I didn't really go through today, but it is the precursor. Then that helps generate your identity words. Now the intersections is the brain buster. I just 9 times out of 10, people start it and they get excited. They're like, oh my God, the intersections, I love this question. And then they freeze and they fall apart. And that's usually when they come calling to me and saying, Sarah Beth, I'm stuck. I just don't know how to move forward. And I say, come back to energy. Don't get so obsessive about what am I doing in my intersections, because that your brain just can't process it. Literally, it's a hard question. So I say, tell me how you feel. When did you do something the last week that you were so jazzed about? It just lit you up. And then go, oh yeah, I can tell you about that. So people are better able to operate from a place of an emotional state. And then that, like I said, reverse engineer into, okay, what was I doing when I was in that emotional state? That's probably an intersection. So you can then say, oh, maybe that was between these 2 identities were really showing up and I had no idea. There's a consciousness and an awareness that we just haven't ever stepped back and observed or thought about what we're doing this way. I use the description, imagine you're a fly on the wall watching yourself at work. What are the things you are physically doing and physically saying, like verbatim? Um, One person I spoke with, she's like, yeah, I talk to my clients, I do a lot of coaching, and I ask them questions about their work. And I was like, give me an example. What kind of question? She says, well, I ask them, what if blank and what if blank? And I was like, that's it. That question stem of what if is what we need to write down as something you are specifically doing in your intersections, because I don't know if I ask questions that way, or other coaches might not ask questions that way. So we got really clear. She didn't even see that. She's like, wow, I didn't notice that.
Mhm.
And now I think she's using a hybrid title, something about being the chief challenger. Like that was such a powerful insight. It revealed this whole new way.
I love
Um,
the inspirations hidden in plain sight there.
yeah.
And that maybe you can't see them. So I'm going to have three questions have come up. The
Oh,
first is a comment about that issue, that giving it to somebody else to help identify for you. So kind of self-distancing, let other people describe it for you. The other is a question about if your professional experience is not in line with your personal identity, how do you prioritize which
mm,
identities to hybridize?
yeah. Well, let's step back and say identity is a huge topic, right? I didn't show this image, but identity is comprised of race, class, gender, ability, profession, hobbies. You have identities in so many different spheres. So if that was its own pie, we're just talking about work identity. So I do think your personal identities matter, but for the sake of figuring out your hybridity, I remove them from the equation. I say your professional identity, to give that definition, is anything you do for work, whether or not you get paid. It could be volunteer, it could be a board seat, it could be an internship. If it's on your resume, then it falls into the bucket of a professional identity. We have a lot of hobbies. People often want to like add that in. Oh, I love gardening and I love to, do this thing. And I'm like, but is that a work identity? So when you're figuring out hybridity, just focus on the work identities, because you are the combination of those as your professional self. Of course, your personal identities factor in, but you're trying to come up with a hybrid title that's based in your work. So that's a really good distinction. Thanks for asking that.
We have a question here from Mike that, and I can empathize with this, at the same challenge. His interests are all over the place. In the first exercise of the big word bank, right? Narrowing
Yeah.
down to three just feels impossible.
And I get this. I sit down with people and I say, tell me what your identities are. And I hear the list of things. And it is very possible that you are all of those things. I don't want to discount that. But my challenge to you is, which ones do you love the most and you use the most? So I love doing graphic design. I love planning events. I love creating new curriculum, but I don't do those every day. They're not my core. And the core are the ones where I'm being really creative and I'm in my facilitation space. I love to facilitate. So I had to really look closely. If you did like a time chart and you looked at which ones are you using, 50 or more percent of the time, the other ones are just slivers. Focus on the ones that are higher than 50% of the time. And then the other identities, so if you thought about this, you have your main Venn diagram, but then you have all your little circles of other identities that are connecting, but they're only connecting kind of like little bubbles popping up. So to narrow it down, focus on the ones that are most frequent, give you the best energy. Like you could do these every day and never get bored of them because you love them. And if somebody removed those primary identities from you, they said, you can only do for me, I can only be a teacher for the rest of my life, I would feel like, well, I'm missing other parts of myself that are really critical. So that's a difference between the primary and the non-primary. Yeah.
This feels like such a great kind of like brown bag lunch session for a company, a good kind of professional team building exercise of sorts. Is that something you do?
Absolutely. I just believe this topic needs to be shared far and wide because it's changing how we see the workforce. When we are hiring for talent, we're not talking about hybridity. We're saying, tell me what you're really good at. Tell me what you have to bring. and the intersections are the value. And if hiring managers and employers thought about that and said, tell me about your intersections. I want to know the crazy combinations you bring to the table that make you different than anybody else I'm trying to hire right now. Or you're trying to get a promotion and you use it to your advantage there. This is really a new way to frame it. Thanks for the clap.
We've got some folks sharing some titles: Chief Encouragement Officer, kind of a packager of good influence. Folks are already stepping into doing these. There's screenshots of Venn diagrams. I'm going to put your website up here one more time for everybody to keep it fresh in the chat. So again, thank you for everyone for joining. Thank you to Sarah Beth. We are still open to questions. But I greatly enjoy this. I know I struggle with this as an entrepreneur, and sort of the running joke in family of like, what exactly does he do? So I know I got a lot of value out of it. I love the exercises, the Mad Lib pitch. That's my next big challenge. So yeah. What comes next? Like, what's the very next way to engage with you? I know you said that you're going to offer some coaching to some folks. That link is in the chat to email you. Your website is here. What's next for all of us and engaging with you? Where can we find you next time?
All the good stuff. So I've been doing all kinds of webinars, been a guest, leading my own, having hybrid talks. So get on my newsletter, which if you go to my website, you can join that, and I talk about any upcoming events or opportunities. I think if you really are trying to go through this work on your own and you want some more coaching and encouragement, the online course I just released, I think 2 weeks ago, and I really have video content talking about everything in depth. I go step by step by step, and a lot of little activities to kind of give you those cushions and scaffold along the way to work through this, because I think it takes a few days, honestly, to get to your hybrid title. I know people have wanted me to do this in 1 hour sessions, and I can do sort of a sample, but it's so much reflection. I just really believe we've never asked ourselves about identity. I've never had someone ask me about that. They tell me what I love to do, what I'm good at, the passion purpose thing. But when do we ever sit down and say, tell me about your professional identities? That's a very different question. So the online courses are my way to support you in that, or I can work with you personally. And also, I just believe this is a workforce future of work discussion. So that's why I've been more public, trying to write the book and do the TEDx and be a part of conferences, because this is a new shift in the workforce. Everybody's talking about the acceleration of jobs and changes in work. The adaptation that is needed right now is greater than ever before. And hybridity falls into all of that. We're doing hybrid events, hybrid learning, hybrid work. So we're hybrid professionals, and no one's talking about that. My dream is really just to help build this momentum. The other piece I want to mention is resumes. I get that question. The elevator pitch has been a great introduction tool because we all network so much digitally and physically. But the resume part and the cover letter part, how do you put your hybridity there? I've got a few tools I've been experimenting with, kind of in the top section of like where you frame, your value prop on your resume and your skills and what you're good at. You can use the intersection, all that reflective thinking you've done on your intersections, those become keywords to put in your narrative about yourself or your skill set section. Like, it's not like once you did them, there's no use anymore. You just discovered a whole treasure trove of information you've never been selling yourself on before. You found your value prop. So this is an exercise in self-discovery and then value distinction. And I've looked at a lot of personal branding materials and career branding, whatever, and they just don't frame it this way. Like, none of that stuff was resonating with me. I think intersectional thinking and relationships between your identities is truly revolutionary. And this is what many people need to think about. We can't just keep listing more and more and more identities, because that doesn't make sense. Honestly, it confuses me.
Well, yeah. And I want to just pause. Is there anybody that wants to make a comment here?
I'm so glad you're all here today. I just want to thank the audience. This work doesn't mean anything without people here. So thanks for coming.
And thank you, Sarah Beth. Again, this was Are You a Hybrid Professional? Surprise, very likely. Thank you for all the worksheets and the guidance and for leading us into the keynote here this morning coming up 10 a.m. Governor Jared Polis will be on. So I can't thank you enough. And for everybody for joining, this is recorded. We'll be sharing it later. Visit the West Slope Startup Week .com for the full calendar of events. We have things going on for the rest of the month. And with that, we can end.
Yeah, this was fabulous. You all know where to find me. And to those of you that are friends from near and far, it's great to see you here. So thanks for joining me.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Have a great startup week, startup month. Bye.